medically understood.
Hey there, folks. Mark Edwards here, and you're watching the Reasoning Aloud YouTube channel and podcast. And today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Dave from Echoplex Media. Dave has spent the last several years studying and following cults and conspiracy theorists online, and that's largely what we talk about today. We talk about the mentality behind cults and conspiracy theory. We talk about how those things have gone from being somewhat of a niche online community in the early 90s to now being actually somewhat dominant in mainstream political discourse today. We also talk about the rise and the fall of the New Atheist movement and its merge, or if you're not so comfortable with that terminology, it's cozying up to the alt-right. We also talk about the intellectual dark web and its eventual fate and how it is starting to exhibit the signs and symptoms of a cult or a conspiracy theory in certain sectors of that public intellectual community. I will let you know up front, this is going to be a trigger warning episode. When we start talking about cults and conspiracy theories, eventually we have to talk about anti-Semitism. So that comes up a lot. We also talk about anti-trans bigotry and how that is a feature of a lot of modern conspiracy theories, as well as just general racism. When we get into talking about some of the grosser elements of the New Atheist movement, we also talk about misogyny, as well as make some allusions to the sexual misconduct that Michael Shermer has been fairly credibly accused of having committed. So if any of that is going to cause you any level of discomfort, if it's going to upset you, then I'm not going to take it personally if you skip this episode, and I would encourage you to do so if that's going to cause you any amount of distress. For those of you that will be sticking around, I thought it was a very good episode. I thought it was an important conversation that needed to be had, and I was happy to participate in it. I think we need to have more conversations like this as we try to rebuild a secular movement for social justice. If you want a really good post-mortem on New Atheism in particular, we mentioned this in the episode itself, but Ina, also known as Nice Mangoes on Twitter, did a 2-part post-mortem on New Atheism at a panel discussion, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. As always, I want to give a special shout out to the patrons of the show. You will be getting early access to the audio of this, as well as having your names appear on screen now. If we get enough of you, we can eventually start doing early access to video as well as I get a subscription service. If you can afford to part with even $1 a month, please consider donating. It really helps me out. It really helps make this a sustainable effort, and I really appreciate it. If you can't commit to a monthly donation, I also have tip jars, Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal. You'll find those links in the down there part as well, and also on the website at reasoningaloud.org. If you cannot support the show financially, I understand. I have been in a situation where I couldn't part with even $1 a month, and I'm not asking that of you. But you can still support the show by liking this video, giving it 5 stars on whatever podcasting app you use, by leaving a review, by sharing it on your social media. All of that boosts this show in the algorithm, and it really, really helps me get the word out and get more patrons and making this a sustainable effort. I also have a second channel called RA Clips that you'll find at the bottom of the main YouTube channel. I cut up all these long episodes into like 5 to 15 minute long clips where we talk about the main stuff, so that if you don't have time to sit down and watch an 1.5 hour long podcast, you can just sort of get all the stuff a la carte. All of the things that are listed by timestamp in the description of this video, you will find in single episode chunks over on that channel as well. So go subscribe to that and show that channel some love. I also still play Stardew Valley over on my Twitch channel, Reasoning Aloud as well. The number of people who have shown interest in watching a middle-aged man play a wholesome farming simulator has actually been very heartwarming, and I really appreciate everybody who's stuck around and hung out with me as I vibe after work and turn my little section of the digital landscape into a wine factory. So I really appreciate that. If that's something you're into, go check it out. I also have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Reasoning Aloud. I'm mostly active on Twitter. but I do post these episodes to Facebook as well. And Instagram is pretty much just pictures of my cat, who, if you want to see pictures of this fuzzy guy, who's angry that I'm picking him up, but if you want to see pictures of him, go over and check out the Instagram, and I try to get one picture out of him every week. And that's all that I post on Instagram, because that's all that app should be for, is pictures of cute animals. If you're doing anything else on that program, stop it. You're not using it correctly. And with all that out of the way, I think it's a good time to talk about cults and conspiracy theories. So I give you Dave from Echoplex Media. Dave from Echoplex Media, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So we are here today to talk about conspiracy theories and how they have grown from this niche subject that that weird kid in high school would not stop talking to you about, to kind of permogulating every facet of our daily lives now, it seems. And you have spent a significant amount of your time researching them. Is that accurate?
We can use the word research, but the problem is, if you've ever talked to a conspiracy theorist and you disagree with them, they'll tell you to do your own research.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess monitoring it, keeping an eye on it. I kind of just like to stay away from that word generally, just because the way it gets used by conspiracy theorists. But sure,
That's fair. Keeping tabs on, tagging and bagging, maybe. Um, so how did you get interested in that in the first place? Like, what was your introduction to that world that made you want to spend so much time just following it around the internet?
kind of had to podcast about something.
Yeah.
But no, I was always sort of interested in cults and cult-like groups. Some might like even like kind of high control groups. Anything. High control group could be anything from a domestic like abuse situation all the way up to Scientology or the Moonies or whatever. And
Right.
it conspiracy theories online just sort of fit that mold, but in a different way. They're like more distributed with like, whereas Scientology, for example, has one leader, David Miscavige, a conspiracy movement might have 10 or 12 little small leaders, but it still kind of operates in the same way where there's an in-group, out-group mentality. There's kind of words for people who are outside of the group. They'll call you a shill or maybe a government puppet. And,
Mhm.
I guess it just kind of flowed from that. A friend of mine, disappeared in 2004 and went off to join the mothership in Clearwater, Florida with Scientology. And I just,
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, well, I hope she gets out. Uh, and I just sort of see conspiracy movements in the same way as I see cults. And I think maybe
Yeah.
that's where my interest in conspiracy movements online came from, was my interest in cults more generally.
They are they are very similar, and I like the way that you put that. A sort of a distributed, uh, whereas a cult generally has a centralized leader or power structure. Conspiracy theories have more of a, at least in modern times, it's very much more horizontal. Like, you have little cells and bits and pieces and players that come to different conventions and forums and talk to people. So it's harder to kind of pin them down. For the most part, I mean, you have like some that are built around a central figure, like your David Ikes and stuff like that. But it seems to be, and I might be wrong about this, but that modern conspiratorial thinking is very diffuse, without any central figures for the most part.
Yeah, like David Icke is a big one, but he's still like a node in a larger movement, that kind of New World Order conspiracy
Hmm.
movement. He's just a big node in it. You know what I'm saying? Because I
Yeah.
mean, he might be the only one who's talking about the reptiles, but yeah, he's just another node. It's just a larger node. There's still other people talking about the reptiles, the New World Order, and he was doing a lot of like weird stuff with COVID and the masks, and so it's sort of all.
Hmm.
It's not like it's ever one thing, right? Like somebody doesn't just believe in chemtrails, right? I've never
Right.
met somebody who believes in chemtrails who doesn't believe in some version of the New World Order conspiracy theory. And so
Yeah.
it's never one thing. But yeah, David Icke is maybe an example of like a bigger figure with a more cult like following that might more closely track with what we would think a regular cult is, just because he's so I don't know, famous.
Yeah. I would well I that's a good point because David Icke really, if you get into what he says and talks about, really the reptiles really are just a parallax view of like a anti-Semitic New World Order conspiracy theory. It's doesn't take you a lot of leaps to get from the reptilians to the protocols for the Elder of Zion, right? Like they're kind of married to one another at a very base layer, it feels like. Um, do you get that sense, or
I mean, the reptiles are about as close to the protocols of the Elders of Zion as
yeah,
you can get without being the protocols of the Elders of Zion. I mean, let's be real. The reptiles are just a stand-in for the Jews. I mean,
yeah,
that's where this all ends up, right? We, you get at the bottom of any of these rabbit holes, except maybe like Bigfoot, because the Bigfoot people are cool and they have weed. But um, but when if you get to the bottom of just about any of these rabbit holes, unfortunately, you end up in a very it ends up being anti-Semitism.
yeah.
Even
Which
if like
maybe
oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh, even if like the
Well, I was
chemtrails
going to say,
movement. Oh, go ahead.
sorry, I'll shut up. Go ahead.
If you were gonna mention the landscapers have a nasty habit of showing up like in the afternoon whenever I'm doing an interview. If I'm doing an interview and if you're hearing some noise in the background, that's what that is.
That's fine. My cat will probably make an appearance at some point or another to howl for food that he already has plenty of. So maybe it would be worthwhile to just kind of do a brief overview of what this big granddaddy conspiracy theory is. That it seems like every because maybe I'm wrong about this, but it feels like every modern conspiracy theory, if you like you said, chip away at it, eventually you hit a spoke on the wheel of the Jewish New World Order and this very deeply anti-Semitic thing that goes back all the way to like what, like the 13th century or something like that. So maybe just a brief overview of what that is, because I'm actually fairly ignorant of the specifics myself, even though I have an interest in the subject.
Well, it's because it's made up. It's gonna kind of
Right.
vary depending on which conspiracy theorist you talk to. But like, I guess in the broad strokes, the idea is that your elected officials or your government aren't really in charge. There is a level above them. That is the power holders in the New World Order. They, people think they create all the wars. People think they're, you know, part of the blood sacrifice of, child blood sacrifice. And I mean, that's it. That's the conspiracy theory, is that there's just a level above the world leaders and that they're meet in secret or whatever, and that they control the world. It's not
Okay.
actually very complicated.
Hmm. And I think about stuff like that, and what I always come back to with these conspiracy theories is there's two things. Number one, there is this desperate searching by scared people who want a plan, even if it's a bad plan. They want some sort of narrative that they can ascribe all the evil in the world to. And it doesn't matter what it is, however just bonkers and batshit it is, as long as there's a plan, that makes them feel better. And the other is that there actually are systems of power and money in the world that do propel governments and people that work in governments and people that work in private industries to do horrible things. That is the history of colonialism and late stage capitalism and neoliberalism. And you don't need to gin up conspiracy theories to have an evil world where evil people are successful by virtue of doing evil. So I've always been confused by, is it just more comforting to believe in the reptiles than it is to believe that it's just the banality of people signing the bottom line to make money?
It's more like it's an us versus them thing. You have a like a in the New World Order conspiracy theory, they're evil for the sake of being evil, like almost like cartoonish.
Mm,
And it's more simple than the way, powerful people will often have aligned interests, and without even ever having met each other, they will act in a way that seems like it might be coordinated because they're just chasing, maybe capital or power or
mhm.
influence. And so, but that's more complicated. And you end up having to, deal in facts when you think about actual systems of power and how they interact with one another. Whereas if it's just the reptiles or the Jews, or if it's, George Soros is out to get you, or Bill Gates, man, that is simple stuff.
Yeah, George Soros is making all the kids be trans or whatever the new thing is. Um, is apparently that's in the new. I haven't read the book, but that's the latest iteration of the theory that I've heard, is that the trans agenda is actually a plot by evil billionaires to something or other. I don't know quite what the point is supposed to be. But uh, I think the other part of it is, if you buy into a conspiracy theory, it automatic it automatically makes you the most intelligent person in the room from
That's
your
it.
perspective. You can be in a room filled with people who are highly educated, who have a wealth of experience, who are in every way intimidating to you intellectually, socially, um, and if you know the truth that these sheeple can't even bring themselves to acknowledge, you are instantly, in your own personal narrative, cooler and more intelligent and better than these people, just by virtue of having that hidden secret information.
Everybody wants to be smart. Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody wants to know something, like when you were a kid, you're like, I know something you don't know, you know.
Mhm.
But and that's another thing where it is a bit cult-like, because when you enter a cult too, they're telling you, they're giving you information that the people outside of the cult don't understand properly. And again, Scientology being a good example there, are the experts on the, the modern science of mental health or whatever they say. And that's that same thing. It's like, you know more than a psychologist because you're reading this L. Ron Hubbard book. And it's the same thing, the
Mhm.
chemtrails people are, oh, you know more than the meteorologists because they're spraying barium in the air to, I don't know, make the frogs gay or whatever it is. One of the conspiracy theories is it's to make people in urban areas more violent, which, that urban areas, it tacks pretty well with racism again, And so, yeah, of course, people always
Yeah.
want to seem smart. And you know, maybe if you don't have a lot of power in your life, or maybe you don't, like how your life is going, then maybe it's a little more alluring. But I'm telling you, it takes all kinds. It's not just people who, don't have power in their life. Business owners are conspiracy theorists a lot of the time. And, it's like they have power over their employees. They kind of call their own shots in a lot of ways. So it's really interesting to kind of think about who that I have secret knowledge kind of attracts, because it isn't just one kind of person. It's more, it's like like a more broad range of people are, you know, I guess, impressed by the idea that they would have secret knowledge, or that they would have, or what they'll tell you is that the knowledge is right out in the open and you just don't see it. It's not that it's
Yeah.
secret, it's that it's right out in the open and you don't see it. So I don't know. But it is, yeah, what you were saying about, yeah, it's, I know something you don't know,
Yeah.
but for adults.
And I now that we're talking about this, I'm wondering at maybe if there is something to um, the idea that if there is this grand, now there's arguments to be made for and against why this is just a bad idea if it were true, but it might serve some internal narrative purpose to, if there is a grand conspiracy that has the world be the way it is, and it's not just normal people doing things in their own interests and behaving in ways you would expect normal people to, that creates this sea of just interwoven competing desires that sort of look like there's a plan in place. But if there actually is a plan, then it gives you a reason not to try to fix it, because what can you do to actually change the system? It's like a salve on the, because we all, I think, in today, I think a lot of us feel like the world is broken at a fundamental level in many ways, and it's a kind of on us to try to fix it, and that's a very daunting task. But if you can convince yourself that maybe there's this hidden oligarchy of people that are never going to let you try, um, that might be something of a comfort to some people, to just, it's okay if I never try to make the world a better place, because it wouldn't work anyway. I mean, you could make the same argument for even if you're not a conspiracy theorist, right? Like the systems of power in the world are deeply enmeshed, and it's very difficult to make a dent in them anyway. But I just wonder if maybe it's a similar narrative at play.
Yeah, I guess it's really interesting because when we run into conspiracy theorists, they oftentimes say they're activists, right? This lady we've been making fun of for years calls herself Madison Star Moon. I think that might have been her rave name, like back in the day when. But she's around my age, and she claims to be an activist, but all she does is like points her phone at the sky and takes
Mm.
like video of what she believes are chemtrails, or sometimes will point her phone at a communications tower and claim that the 5G on the tower is killing us. But, doing that is a lot easier than, like, organizing a soup kitchen in your community, right?
Yeah,
Like, or
yeah,
organizing to help the homeless, or organizing people to do anything, to get anything done. So, like, it's sort of this way in which somebody can, it could just be posting online about the truth that they think they know. I love that your teacup says tea on it, by the way.
yeah. Oh, thank you. I have another one that says coffee. I specifically ordered them. I made these myself. If you ever find your way to my Redbubble store, all it is those cups, and then I have started taking insults people hurl at me online and turning them into T-shirts and stickers. The most recent one, it just says "You're probably short." Um, so if anybody out there is interested in coffee cups or teacups or weird fucking T-shirts, that's how I've decided to merchandise. Um,
That's
so
funny.
um, what So what is, in your view, the difference between, I know that they're deeply interrelated, but the mentality behind a conspiracy theory and a cult? Because I think there is a difference. And from the outside looking in, as somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time studying, it seems like it's locus of control and size, really, to a certain extent.
It's just that there's some overlap in the ways of thinking. It's not that I mean, it's not that it's it's like hard to really like maybe differentiate. So maybe instead, I can talk about where they're the same, because like
Okay.
differentiating, it's just like, well, it's not a cult. It's just people believe in chemtrails. That's not a cult. There may be little cult-like groups that form within that movement, though, of people who believe
Mhm.
in chemtrails, because some maybe charismatic or seemingly charismatic figure comes out, and now everybody's kind of hanging on their every word and watching every video they make, right? So it's more like little small cults or cult-like groups kind of like show up within conspiracy movements. It's not that the conspiracy theory idea itself or is like a cult. It's just the way that people's followings happen in there. And I think it might have something to do with people who go find a conspiracy theory community, say it's chemtrails or whatever. They're looking for the answers to something. And I think people who join, we'd say like alternative or fringe religious groups, are also like looking for the answer to something. And that might be at the core of, why the behavior of the we'll call them adherents might closely resemble like one another. But yeah, the differences are, pretty stark in that cults will try to control your movements, control who you associate with, um, who you marry. And I mean, conspiracy movements do that, but they just call people who don't agree with them shills, right? And it's the person kind of makes their
Yeah.
own decision. Like if you remember, there was all these stories about QAnon people like no longer being able to hang out with their family because they can't stop talking about QAnon. But that's
Mhm.
a little bit different than something like just any cult. We'll do Scientology again, where if I'm a critic of Scientology and you're in the cult, they will tell you that you cannot be my friend, you know? And I think
Yeah.
that's a major difference is in the way that you alienate the people in your lives. If you're part of a conspiracy movement, you might do it yourself just by like nonstop talking about chemtrails. And if you're in like a more formalized and more organized cult, the cult will probably tell you, mom doesn't like the cult. Don't hang out with mom no more. So that might be a real big difference there, is how outsiders are dealt with and how they try to
Yeah.
control your social group, or how your social group is controlled by your association with each.
you mentioned QAnon, and this is where this subject really kind of hits home for me. Because I think, do you ever listen to last podcast on the left? Um,
I might have heard it a couple times.
yeah. Um, so they're pretty good. They do deep dives into this kind of stuff. And not for everybody, but one of the hosts, Henry Zabrowski, who's a comedian, he said something once that I have never forgotten because it is so obviously true, which is that the Nazis were what happens if you give Gamergate an army. Um, that everybody looks at QAnon and these little weird right wing cults as innocuous, kind of, they're not serious, they're funny, they're holding up signs about Q, and that's all the Nazis were right up until they were the fucking Nazis, right? They were just weird, severe, angry, racist people who nobody wanted to pay attention to until it was too late. And so the world we live in now is a world where there is a conspiracy theory that is slowly encroaching on our daily lives and is consuming more and more of our public figures and is actually threatening to destabilize our government at a very serious level and in a very serious way. And I I think that is something that's very much worth analyzing and paying attention to. And I don't think that I'm equipped to do that. But have you had any insights into how that process is, like, where did that come from?
Well, if you think about it, I, you know, I didn't see QAnon coming. Nobody saw that coming, right? Like
Yeah.
there, it was weird to say the right thing at the right time, I guess, based on what was going on. It's not right, but I guess like as far as it being effective, right? It had the kind of the
Mhm.
right elements at the right time. It had a savior figure, which a lot of conspiracy movements don't have, which is what I think makes QAnon different. Like as weird as it is, like they have saviors. The
Mhm.
chemtrails conspiracy only has villains, and the only saviors are people who are pointing their phone at the sky and doing a video. But in this case, the saviors in the QAnon movement are people with power. Donald
Mhm.
Trump, Michael Flynn. Okay, Donald Trump and Michael Flynn are like the two main, because like that Lynn Wood guy is like has no power. Rudy Giuliani has no power, but it was powerful people were going to go in and use the military to stop the child abusers and free the children from the tunnels, or whatever flavor of it you believe in. And
Mhm.
that's the main difference, and that's like what these other movements were missing. There was no messiah figure in any of these other movements, and I think that's what makes QAnon dangerous, is these people believe that there's a Messiah. So if you know, one of the core claims of people who believe in QAnon is that it kind of comes from Pizzagate. Well, in fact, it's just Pizzagate 2.0. It's that elites who are usually Democrats are torturing children to harvest adrenochrome. I don't know, to drink it to
Mhm.
live forever, right? I think the only person drinking baby blood to live forever is Peter Thiel. That's my conspiracy theory. But but that's just blood libel.
Yeah.
That's just the same old, same old. If you go back to the 80s, the Satanic Panic, they were sacrificing babies again, right? But in the Satanic Panic in the 80s, there was no Messiah. There was no power. The president wasn't coming to save the day. And I think that to some extent, I guess it gives the people in the conspiracy hope, but I think it also makes the movement much more dangerous because they can rally around a leader. And in this case, it was a leader who was the most powerful person on the fucking planet we live on. And they'd
Mhm.
hang on his every word, and they were ready to take action based on things that they believed that he implied, based on lies that they were either told or made up themselves, based on some weird cryptic post on 8chan. And I know that this doesn't make sense and it sounds crazy, and I guess it is, but this is more dangerous than other stuff because of that and because of the Messiah figure. I just can't
Yeah.
remember any other conspiracy theory where there was a specific someone or specific someone's coming to save the day, and that you were part of their army to help them. I don't
Yeah, I mean,
remember
there
one.
was the Nazis. I mean, that's basically what the Nazis were. I mean, that's why I keep coming back to it because one of the things that's enmeshed within QAnon is right-wing populism. And I mean, we have a very good example of a prior movement in history that was based around a religious cult effectively. It was a cult, like a pagan blood worshipping cult is what the Third Reich was, who used the fear of the Jewish Zionist conspiracy and like the blood libel thing, and they galvanized around an authoritarian leader, and they took that all the way. They almost took the entire world straight into the bowels of hell. And I look at the Q symbol with a American flag in it, and I don't see something funny about it. I see a very dark future where there are people being dragged to camps by people with that on armbands wrapped around their arms very easily. Like, for want of a few nails, we could go that direction. And it terrifies me. And it's terrifying because it's so ridiculous that it the right has gotten to the point where they are so good at, I hate to use their meme, but like 20D chess propaganda. Like, if you ever want to figure out just how bad or how far behind the eight ball in terms of the propaganda war we are, try to explain Clown World to a liberal.
Right. Yo, that's and the thing is that the way this works too is, well, I mean, maybe I'll go back a little bit. First of all, um, it's it's one thing to like laugh at some of the crazy things that the QAnon people do, and I think you should. I think ridicule and mockery can be powerful, but
Absolutely.
I think that the flip side of that is you get if you're laughing at them, it doesn't mean that you don't understand that the movement more broadly could be pretty dangerous. I don't think
Hmm.
January 6th happened the way it happens the way it does without QAnon, or without
Right.
a very similar movement to it. I don't think that I don't think that the response to COVID by the broader right would be what it is without QAnon.
Mm.
Even though there were hardly any Q drops about COVID and about it being a hoax or, you know, a bioweapon, that didn't need to happen because the seeds for that kind of thinking about it were sort of laid down already. And it's like the drops, the posts on 8chan or whatever are generally kind of innocuous and cryptic. It's the next layer down. It's the hucksters and the conspiracy theorists. They call them bakers who, take the cryptic drop and tell everybody what it means. And those are like the people who are really kind of in control of the movement. But
Hmm.
yeah, I have been watching people tell me for like, ever since Trump came around, oh, you call everything you don't like Nazi shit. And so I try not to compare things to the Third Reich just because I don't want to get in that argument with somebody. But
Fair enough.
but but that's just me. That's just like an argument I'm tired of having. But that doesn't mean that it's not right. It's selfish. I'm tired of having that exact argument with people over and over and over again. But you're right. You take a conspiracy theory where you have uh, a clearly defined bad guy or a clearly defined set of bad guys, and then you add a messiah figure to it, and that messiah figure could raise an army. You're right, and it's happened before. Like I said, I just don't want to get into that argument with people anymore. So I try to be like highly specific. Also, I'm not like honestly, my 20th century history just isn't that great. That's like not. It's like not. I don't know. I'm not like super well versed in 20th century history myself. So maybe I'm not the right
Yeah.
one to be making the comparison anyway.
Yeah. Fair enough. I think it's unfortunate, right? Like, Godwin's law kind of fucked up a lot of discourse around comparing people to the the Third Reich because, unfortunately, most people that get compared to the Nazis do not deserve that comparison, and I think the left and liberals are a bit too happy with throwing that around. I try to be pretty careful with my language, like I'll call certain people fascists, I'll call other people authoritarians. I genuinely think that QAnon is like an actual variant of Nazism. Like, I think that the parallels are very, very similar, and I think that you can draw a lot of bright lines that are connect those dots. And I would actually argue that a lot of the people in QAnon probably would appreciate that comparison when they're not talking publicly. Um, but I understand what you're saying is it's a good way to lose an argument before you start having it because somebody's just going to say, "Oh, you think everybody's a Nazi." Um,
Right. I'm just real careful there. And I understand what you're saying. I think that, there's this guy, he started out as a QAnon influencer. His name is Ghost Ezra.
mm,
And now in his Telegram is a fucking cesspool, by the way. That's where all the people went when they got kicked off of every other platform. Um,
mhm,
it's just straight up anti-Semitic propaganda. Just that's all it is. And there's hundreds of thousands of people in there. It's like I think like the funnel, like, yeah, this is a funnel. The top of the funnel is wide. It catches things, the funnel will kick people out of the funnel as they go down to the bottom. Right, the top of the funnel is like save the children.
mhm.
Where we go, one we go all, which just sounds like a brotherhood and sisterhood or whatever. And at the bottom of the funnel again is just anti-Semitic shit. It's always anti-Semitic shit and blood libel. And I think that, excuse me, I think that in the case of QAnon, through no particular you know organization or no particular planned set of behaviors, that funnel was smooth and quick as it got people to the bottom. And I don't think anyone planned it that way. I just think it was the right sort of message again. And you just got to be real, real skeptical anytime you hear anybody talking about saving the children. I'm just telling you.
Mm.
Some things that are for the children, like at least in the United States in my lifetime, anything that was talking about saving the children was usually trying to take some of your rights away from you.
Yeah. Did this is the part where I get really nerdy and maybe a little spooky. Did you
Yeah.
ever see the either the movie or the series or read the manga Ghost in the Shell?
No, but uh, I might have seen part of it because I've dated a lot of guys who've been into anime, but I can't.
Yeah.
I don't think I know the story well enough to talk about it. Yeah.
So I would highly recommend that you watch the series because each variant of it is very different. But there's a series called Standalone Complex, and it's one of the most prescient pieces of media that I have ever seen in my life. It came out like in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it basically predicted, I think, the media landscape and a lot of the things that were going to happen in public discourse. But the gist of the story is that everybody on the planet basically has a neural link to the internet implanted in their brain, and that is as common of a thing as having a cell phone is today. So everybody is constantly online, and the the gist of the story is that there is, and spoiler warnings, there is something that starts happening where terrorists start doing terrorist activities, and they all have the same story and they all appeal to the same ideology, and nobody can track down who the originator of that ideology was, and they start referring to it as a standalone complex. And what they realize is that there is this sort of gestalt idea that is bubbling up from the internet that has now effectively become the actual literal collective unconsciousness of mankind, and you have dozens of copies without there ever being an original idea in the first place. And I see that, and I think QAnon, where you just have a couple of people shit posting, and then it promulgates to the extent that everybody thinks that they're a savior in their own little right wing conspiracy world, and then they just go out and do shit.
That story that like sounds a little familiar. I don't think I've seen it there, but it seems like that's maybe a story that's been told a few different ways, maybe in a few
Mhm.
other different kinds of media or pieces of media. I don't. There. we have a pretty good idea of who the two people who posted as Q are.
Oh, we do?
Um, the people
Yeah,
who
I
are
didn't know
doing the
that.
research on it seem to think that I forget the first guy's name, but Ron Watkins is the more recent one. He's Jim Watkins' son. They started they basically purchased 8chan and they ran
Mhm.
8chan. Now 8chan's gone. But like I said, the the ideas aren't really coming from those Q posts. They're, and again, like you said, where they just kind of show up on the internet. That's how the ideas like are more, at least what I saw from QAnon, that the ideas more or less came about that way from a few shit posters, and you don't know who they were, and now they become memes like save the children rallies, if you remember all that QAnon shit.
Mhm.
I don't think there were any posts by the person who called themselves Q or the internet meme or I don't even know if it was a person, a group, or Ron Watkins or whoever. I don't think there was much, if any, posts about that. I think that came up sort of organically within the community in the way that you describe, where people are like, well, we got to save the children from the Clintons or the Soroses, or maybe the Clintons and the Soroses, or Podesta or whoever it is. So I think that's if that came out in the 90s, that is pretty, it seems pretty predictive. But I want to say I've seen media like from before the 90s too, that were kind of different versions of that same story. And it might not have involved the internet necessarily, but it's the telling of the story of any moral panic, right?
Mhm.
Just using whatever technology is emerging. So I think the satanic panic came along in much the same way without the internet,
Yeah, it's a good example, actually, yeah.
because there was no central who was running the satanic panic. Where did the ideas about that begin? Who started it? It was just permeating our culture in the 1980s, and everything from He-Man, which they were mad at for Satan. They should have been mad at He-Man and She-Ra because that shit was hella gay. And I mean, they shouldn't be mad at. You shouldn't be mad because that's
Right,
awesome, right? But that's what they
right.
couldn't. They were so fucking freaked out about Satan that they couldn't see the gay right in front of them, and it was Dungeons and Dragons, but we don't know like who was telling you to be afraid of Dungeons and Dragons. You could get instances of people telling you, but like who'd they learn it from, you know? And it's the same thing. It's like where did it come from? And it's just how a moral panic bubbles up. And we see them all
Mhm.
the time. There's, right now there's probably 6 or 7 moral panics happening, probably 2 of which I don't even know
Yeah,
about.
we just recently went through the anti-CRT moral panic, and, um, for a while there, I guess uh, trans athlete thing was always that's still always bubbling along, but I expect the next one is probably going to be, something related to, like, gender or queerness that they can use as a wedge issue in the midterms. See, I actually have something of a more cynical take on, like, the moral panics, that we've seen recently. I think most of them are astroturfed, um, which, I guess that could be a conspiracy theory if we didn't have evidence that people were doing that, um, s- and financing, small pseudo intellectuals to push these things out, specifically with the intention of driving people to vote along the line, while they're in the voting booth, being enraged about critical race theory or, they're the the trans agenda or whatever the hell they think is going on. They'll also probably pull the lever for a Republican. So I'm a little more cynical in that regard. I don't know if that makes me a conspiracy theorist, but
Well,
that's how.
well, what we learned, like from to some extent, the Tea Party was a moral panic, right?
Yeah.
And what we learned from that was that at the beginning, it was just these kind of small community groups full of, kind of right wingers who were upset basically that, you know, Obama won the election more or less. And then moneyed interests saw it and started funding Tea Party events. And you had Glenn Beck hosting the events and stuff. And I think that just as like if you think about the differences between the internet then and the internet now, it's the internet, everything's moving so much faster and things are churning so much more quickly. So I think that maybe we're more likely to be watching the same cycle where some, dumb fuck or group of dumb fucks or whatever, it starts worrying about critical race theory, and then some moneyed interest, above them in the social hierarchy kind of reaches down and pulls them up. And I think that the cycle just probably happens more quickly.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
like, you're talking about Ruffo and Lindsay,
mhm.
I don't know who was supporting Rufo. I don't know how he got where he was, but James Lindsay got supported by that. What's that? I forget that guy's name now. That Christian nationalist guy.
Yeah.
Oh, I forget his
Uh,
name.
yeah, the guy with something the internal fight with the Southern Baptist Convention, I forget his name too. Rufo is, he's a fellow of a conservative think tank, so he's getting bankrolled by those people. I don't know what the name of the think tank is, but it's one of the many. I
Is
don't
it
even think there
Manhattan
are
Institute by chance?
I don't think it's the Manhattan Institute. It
One of
might
those
be.
things. One of
I
those
mean,
things, though.
yeah, one of them. I mean, all of them. I'm not actually aware of any legitimately liberal think tanks. Like, I, as far as I'm aware, like, are there any that you know of offhand? I think most of them are either conservative or quote unquote centrist, um, because they're financed by billionaires, and billionaires have no interest in promoting anything approaching actual liberalism or, God forbid, leftism. So it just doesn't make sense to me that there would be.
I mean,
Um,
maybe like the ACLU or
yeah,
just maybe NAACP, maybe, but it's not the same sort of organization, right?
yeah,
Like you're saying, it's not where some billionaire thinks they're doing a philanthropy by donating to some galaxy brain shit that they think is like going to make the world a better place, right? It's like the
yeah,
yeah, it's. I think you're right. I think they tend to be centrist and right leaning that are, if they're think tanks, because otherwise they generally would call themselves like advocacy groups or well, mostly advocacy groups, right? They're still
yeah,
thinking and like trying to influence policy the same way a think tank is, but it's sort of maybe something like the ACLU or the NAACP is like maybe a little more bottom up than top down. Maybe it's donations or people like me and you giving them $20 or $30 a year, and that's how they kind of keep going versus the other model with the think tank where it's more big money donations. But that's just a guess.
yeah. I think the apex of that, that I've or the most that type of thing that I've seen recently was Barry Weiss's podcast. She did an episode on critical race theory, and she had um, the anti-critical race theory side was Chris Rufo, and the not actually pro, but we're going to pretend like he is side was a guy from a very conservative think tank, and that's your two sides. Which, as far as I can tell, is kind of the purpose of those things. Is if you put out enough of these conservative, center, right, quote unquote centrist think tanks, and the news needs an expert on one side or the other to talk about an issue, you get somebody from the Heritage Foundation on one side and somebody from the Manhattan Institute on the liberal side, and you've basically controlled the narrative because all your experts are paid by somebody whose interests are that we don't tax billionaires.
Right,
Um,
you're basically drawing an Overton window that excludes
yeah.
everything like to the left of, I don't know, Al Gore.
Yeah, which I mean, and that's the like when I say that there are like legitimate, like not conspiracies, but the world is filled with these not even backroom deals, just this is just what rich, powerful people do is they set the system up so that it continues to give them power and money.
I mean, that's
Um,
what power does, right? Power tries
yeah,
to maintain and accumulate more power. I mean, what else would it do?
yeah. So you look at that, and I think it might be easier to think, okay, but what if it was reptiles?
Or maybe you think about this, maybe you personally might lean right. You might be a right winger and or just, I don't know, whatever a middle of the road conservative is these days, right? Like, and now if like you were saying when they go, when the Barry Weiss thing is a good example because I don't remember who they had on either, but I, you know, I I'm I'm a follower of Barry Weiss, let's say. I think she's done a lot of harm to our society. I blame her as much for the rise of Brett Weinstein as I blame Sam Harris, you know. But
That's fair.
but I think I listened to a little of the one you're talking about, and I was just wondering like why the person against Chris Ruffo wasn't like a lawyer, like somebody
Yeah.
with like a JD or a grad student who's like in a law department doing critical law scholarship. I was like, why? Barry Weiss could have gotten somebody like that in a minute, but instead it was like some center right person who did push back on what Chris Ruffo was saying, but not. I turned it off after 10 minutes because I fucking can't stand Chris Ruffo and I can't stand Barry Weiss, right? But it
Yeah.
just occurred to me like the person was a little more knowledgeable on race issues than Chris Ruffo was, but they weren't talking about critical race theory, and it would have been no trouble at all for someone with Barry Weiss's platform to get somebody from a critical scholar from a law department at some university. Would have been nothing for her to do it, and that person
Yeah.
would know what the fuck critical race theory is, but that was probably not what they wanted, right?
Right.
Because what we know about Barry Weiss is why would she want that? That wouldn't be good for what she's
Yeah.
doing, and her audience would have been like, "Why'd you have that crazy loony lefty on?" Right?
Yeah. I to this day I will never forgive Chris Rufo for making me read all of the critical race theory and critical theory scholarship that I read to understand why he was wrong. I don't know if you've ever attempted to read any of that shit.
It's
Crenshaw
very
writes some
dense. It's
Crenshaw's
dense.
stuff is, like, good, but, like, it's so fucking dry. Like, it is like, it's important, right? I'm glad there are people out there that are researching it, but it's not what I wanna do with my weekend, and I will never forgive that motherfucker for making me have to read all that just to n be able to explain why he's full of shit. Um
Well, one could just go to like the Wikipedia article about critical race theory, read the first paragraph, and figure out that Chris Ruffo and James Lindsay are full of shit because it says it's a study in mostly in legal departments of universities, specifically about how law is written and appears to be colorblind, but then is not implemented in a colorblind way because of the way that our history impacts everything in our society. And that's
Yeah.
like a 10,000-foot view. I'm probably butchering it, but
Yeah, no,
it's
maybe I should have read the Wikipedia article. Maybe I'm just a fucking tryhard. I don't
but we need tryhards too, right? I just don't have time. I work full time and well,
Yeah,
full time ish, and I stream 6 nights a week. But I do like to know what the fuck I'm talking about, at least from like a
yeah.
30,000-foot view. The one I think
That's a
James
very good
Lindsay.
summation of the literature that I read. I should have started with Wikipedia and ended there.
Well, don't end with Wikipedia, but I mean, if you're in a hurry, at least like there's people trying to fact check it. But I
Yeah,
got to tell you, I think James Lindsay has done like more harm than James Ruffo could ever hope to do. I think people
yeah,
take James Lindsay seriously because he's a mathematician, which is
yeah,
really weird because that doesn't mean you would know. I have a degree in political science. That doesn't mean I'm a math expert. Why would a
mhm,
math expert then be and why would a math expert then know like about critical theory and critical race theory and critical scholarship? Like it doesn't make any sense. He's just mad. He's just mad that people are like learning about something that he wishes they wouldn't. And he's pretty effective because he did that weird. I don't know if you know about like how he kind of came on the scene. Do you know about the conceptual penis article he did?
yeah. I'm familiar with but a r I never tire of hearing this story retold. So go ahead for the people
There's
that haven't
actually
heard it.
Yeah, there's actually an article on my we used to call it our blog, but then this lady got mad at us and she said about us, she said, where'd it go? I have it here somewhere. Oh man. Oh,
They put me in a fucking magazine.
so now we call our blog our magazine. And so it's in my magazine,
Was
but
that Pluck Rose?
no, that's a lady named Betty Washam. Let's not get into that.
Okay.
That's way at the bottom. That's like 1:30 a.m. on my stream. Me 4 or 5 cocktails deep in the chat, being like Betty Washam, yeah. But um, so I wrote a little article about it, and what happened was they wrote this article. It was supposed to essentially kind of discredit social sciences and social science journals, and it was
Mhm.
about the conceptual penis. Um, And they tried to get it published in a reputable journal. The reputable journal rejected it. They then went and got it published in a pay-to-play journal. And then they didn't pay the fee. And then they claimed victory. And that's like the shortest possible version of the story.
Yeah. I am I obviously can't see inside his head to know what's going on. I can only speculate, but I'm fairly well convinced that James Lindsay's primary motivation is that he's not Sam Harris and is very mad about that fact. Um, like he is he came up in the whole new atheist scene like on the periphery doing like the like talk circuit and writing really shitty books about atheism, and he just never got the attention. Like that man has the I just look at him and all I see is desperation, like for being a public intellectual that's taken seriously by quote unquote serious people, and has failed at that. And so he has said, well, fuck it, I'll just be a troll.
Yeah, I what I do like is that he eventually started talking to people who know more about the matter of critical race theory than he does. And he got fucking destroyed when he started doing it. Just people who had like cursory knowledge of what critical
Yeah.
scholarship is just absolutely destroyed him. And he was like, he had really nothing. Mark Lamont Hill just
Yeah.
bodied
It
him
was
so bad, so polite, so even keeled, and just completely bodied him, told him he didn't know what he was talking about, but it didn't matter. And this is where this kind of IDW stuff kind of gets right in that same lane with the conspiracy theory stuff. Is if I absolutely wreck somebody who believes in chemtrails in a discussion, it doesn't matter.
yeah.
I mean, you might like it, and somebody who didn't never heard of chemtrails before might be like, well, that doesn't seem real. You know, the guy who didn't believe in it seems like they know what they're doing a little bit better. But to the people who were already on that train, it doesn't matter because
Yeah.
I'm just like a NSA agent or something sent there to like get them off their game. And I think that, you know, to the people who maybe follow James Lindsay for whatever odd reason, he's not very charismatic. Um, it doesn't matter that Mark Lamont Hill or that, you know, I forget who it was on, was it MSNBC or CNN had him on, and they, you know, didn't do as good a job as Lamont Hill did, but they still did a pretty good job. But it doesn't matter because those people, I don't think they know or care about critical race theory. I think what they're mad at is anybody trying to change the status quo so that we take privilege away from the privileged.
Hmm.
And I think that's like the mission there. And so if that's your mission, it doesn't matter if you call it critical race theory, social justice warriors, third wave feminism, start talking about the gay agenda or the trans agenda. It just doesn't matter. They're all interchangeable. It's all the same thing. And it goes all the way back to Dungeons and Dragons because those were weird goth kids that might upset the status quo and might, you know, turn your kids into non-Christians and take power away from, you know, Christianity in society. And, you know, that ship sailed, thankfully. Like the biggest group now are like the nuns in our society. Depending, you
Yeah.
have to break it down. Well, you have to break it down a little bit farther. But yeah, we're one of like the non-religious are, if not the biggest group, one of the biggest groups in America. Not the majority, but possibly the plurality. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter what they call it. It's all the same thing, and it's all like the goal is always seems to be the same. It's to like maintain the status quo of who has power and who gets, you know, who gets eyeballs and earballs and attention. And you know, I don't, you know, the CRT thing's mostly over, but that doesn't matter. The next one will just be something else, but it'll be the same fucking people. It's almost all the same people, like from Gamergate, right? Like if you
Hmm.
look at it, like I don't know where James Lindsay was during Gamergate, but you know, I know where Sargon was, and Sargon's now talking about critical race theory. And so it's not like
Yeah.
it's not like it's just the same ideas. No, it's some of the same people. You know, Milo's talking about critical race theory, and he was all up in that Gamergate shit. Steve Bannon's talking about critical race theory, and some people think Steve Bannon was the fuel that got thrown on that Gamergate thing that made it explode into, you know, more like a more mainstream culture. So it's like, you know, it's always going to be something, you know, the it's always going to be something, and it's really strange that it's coming out of like secular kind of secular society.
Well, so I actually am not surprised by that. Because did you follow the whole Mergegate discourse?
Mergegate?
That
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I listen to Ina's
Okay.
show kind of everyone that comes out, I listen to. I like Ina, so.
Yeah. So I yeah, it's a good podcast. I'll link that in the show notes for people that are watching or listening to this. But the long and the short of it is somebody put out an article talking about how new atheism had sort of merged with the alt-right or the far right, and that created a huge backlash. And Ina did this podcast, this two-part panel discussion with some really cool people, just doing kind of a post-mortem on that. And I listened to that, and I never really got involved in movement atheism. I was an atheist. I have been my whole life, but I I encountered that, and I thought the idea of organizing specifically around the absence of a belief or set of values is not something that's going to ultimately be productive. And I didn't foresee how negative it would eventually become, but I think going back in time, it's very obvious that it was probably always going to turn out badly, because you're essentially creating a space where all your biggest figures are people who are bullying other people for their values. And that was never going to be good, right? I wouldn't have expected it to turn into what it's fucking turned into, which is a cesspool. Um, but it was never going to be great. And I think that what we should have done and what we probably should do now is, instead of creating a movement around atheism, we should create a movement that has progressive values and ideas as central to that movement. That's the point of the movement, and atheism or agnosticism is just sort of like the ticket cost of entry. So like a movement specifically for uh you know humanist morals, or what do they call it? What is
Yeah,
that?
humanist. I think
Yeah,
humanism is generally what you're describing. Although I'll say that I've
secular humanism.
yeah, I was helping out when the local humanist chapter here in Silicon Valley like couldn't meet in person. I helped them make sure that their
Hmm.
meeting was not only attendable but viewable. And I think that's what that is. And I think that the people in the one here in Silicon Valley, they're fairly progressive. Some what we would might call a shit lib or whatever. A lot of people who maybe had some of that Silicon Valley money. A lot of
Yeah,
see a lot of houses that look like maybe they were in Palo Alto, but nice people, nice
right.
people. Maybe little more of the TED Talk crowd than I'd prefer, but
Yeah,
not fans of the Steven Pinker TED Talks. It was, but that That's always been there. The humanist like, the American Humanist Association was here long before movement atheism,
yeah,
and it hasn't picked up steam, and I think it's because it seems well, it's nice, you don't dunk on anybody.
yeah,
there's no dunking on, like, religious people, and, they had people come speak at the humanist thing that were not atheists. They had pastors
yeah,
come and speak and give a humanist message, but that's a religious pastor. And so it's a
right.
little more big tent, and it's more about humanism than it is about the secular part of it, right? It's more about the humanism. And I think new atheism was kind of a big thing in the 2000s because all these people realized that they could tell everybody that they don't believe in God and it actually doesn't fucking matter. And nobody like thought that before. It never like the internet allowed that. And it was fine, but I mean, I remember I was at, the amazing meeting. I was it was either right after Elevator Gate or right before Elevator Gate, and I was hanging out with these gals. My boyfriend was supposed to go with me, but he got real sick and couldn't come, and so I was like, "Oh, I'll just go. I'll meet some people, it's fine." And at those events, I'd always look for the women because there were not that many of them because atheism was a big boys club, but they also were fun, right? The
Yeah.
gals and they met some gals around my age, and they were sort of asking about after parties, or I was asking about after parties, and they're like, "Oh, we're trying to find out which one Michael Shermer's at," and I'm like, "Oh, I'd like to go to the after party that Michael Shermer's at." They're like, "We wouldn't," and it didn't dawn on me then, but after like the stuff about Shermer, let's say not being able to keep his hands to himself came out, I realized that those gals
Yeah.
were part of like kind of a whisper network that had existed
Yeah.
inside the community. And I just went to the after party they went to, and I remember it being fun. We got drunk, like everybody was nice and stuff. And
Yeah.
I just think that, the main problem that it suffered from was it was like upper middle class white boys club. And
Yeah.
like the four horsemen of new atheism or whatever, right? They were all white dudes. They were all rich. And it was like, this is, I didn't see it at the time, but when you look back on it, you're like, well, this is not going to come out. This is not going to come out good. The only one of them with any damn sense was Hitchens, and he drank himself to death, uh, because I guess he had sense or whatever. And he wasn't perfect either, but he was the only one of them
Yeah.
motherfuckers I ever heard admit to being wrong about something. That's for sure. And,
Yeah.
I don't know if I think everything just went completely haywire in that movement when Rebecca Watson said, "Hey, don't hit on me in the elevator," and all the guys were like, "Blah blah blah." If you were in Saudi Arabia, and it's like, well, that the whole thing everything just went completely potato in that movement when that happened. But that was certainly an inflection point, but it wasn't like that shit hadn't been bubbling up before. And the movement was just basically led by privileged white guys. And nobody should be too terribly surprised that if a movement where you're dunking on people and it's all privileged white guys at the top, nobody should be too surprised when it ends up being kind of sexually harassy, and people end up being comfortable with weird race science shit ranging from phonology to IQ pseudoscience. It probably should have surprised nobody, but I think, at the very beginning, people were just kind of excited that you could tell other folks that you didn't believe in God. And I think that was actually a
Yeah.
good thing. It was a social justice movement at the beginning, even if they weren't
Yeah.
SJWs, which is odd, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and I remember being comforted by the existence of the movement, and actually the closest I got to being a part of the movement atheism was following Skept Chick, like Rebecca Watson's old
God, I love
blog.
her.
It was, and I remember Elevator Gate, and I just it 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 always surprised me, and it really shouldn't have, that all of those people were actually kind of gross. And w- uh, like, it's why I look at Lindsay the way I look at him, which is sort of the synthesis of what really was going on in New Atheism, which is this like 4chan-y kind of edge lord. Um, I'm not going to take anything seriously, rich crybaby white boy club. And I'm not surprised that he came out of that movement, because he did come out of that movement. Like, most of his career was trying to write books about atheism, and they were all unsuccessful because he's a shit writer. Um, so I just, yeah, I think that it's kind of, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and I think that it's sort of on us to, if we're going to do something, to make it not about, I don't know. I'm still not sure where I land on it. I'm trying to figure this out myself, because I just recently, in the past year, started having like a public platform, and um, mostly it's been political with regards to like leftism and things like that. But I think being an atheist, being a humanist, and somebody who thinks about morals, it's probably something I should pay more attention to and think more deeply about, because, you know, we're, I think in many ways, a lot of what we're dealing with is the fallout from the dissolution of that movement, and its impact on the culture.
Well, I think like it's not that hard to draw a line from Elevator Gate to maybe Gamergate, because a
Yeah.
lot of the Gamergate people, especially the people that came out of it real strong, were like YouTube skeptics, right? It
Mhm.
was, and I don't mean, skepticism gets a really bad rap. It's got so much baggage attached to it now. I just call myself a cynic. I feel like people understand it better and don't assume that I want to measure their skull, right? And so,
Right.
but I feel like we can draw a line then from that to like the alt right, from that to MAGA in a lot of ways, to like the MAGA movement, and people, white guys being disillusioned and thinking other people are like shitting in their sandbox or whatever. I don't think it's like a straight line, and I think there's some differences, and obviously there's a lot of nuance, but it's again, it's just a lot of the same fucking people. It's, and you know, what, you had mentioned Barry Weiss earlier, and I just wanted to really, really quickly mention that Barry Weiss claims that she was bullied and uh, targeted with anti-Semitism in a company Slack, and that's why she quit the New York Times. The CEO of the New York Times, on his way out, was interviewed on, at the time, I believe it was called Recode Decode, but it's Kara Swisher's podcast. She now does a podcast called Sway. And he said, we looked through it and we asked her for that because he said, we want to fire anybody who does that. We don't accept that at the New York Times. And he said right after he quit that they found nothing. And so I just want to congratulate everybody that you mean tweeting at Barry Weiss made her quit the New York Times. I just want to congratulate everyone.
I remember when she quit, I think and there's a tweet out there somewhere where I said, don't worry, she's going to springboard off of this into a successful podcast where she talks endlessly about how doesn't have a platform to speak on her multi-million-dollar huge platform. And that turned out to be correct. I'm shocked at how prescient I am. I must be like sipping on spice or something. I don't know how I pulled that one out of the ether.
You were just able to tell which way the wind was blowing, my dude.
I mean,
that's a quick way. That's a lot of everybody saying that. From like Sam Harris to the people on Fox News to Brett and Heather to Barry Weiss to Jordan Peterson to Andy No, everybody, they all sit there and tell you they're being silenced, but there you are reading and hearing what they're saying as they tell you they're being silenced. And it's like, no, if you were being silenced, I wouldn't know about it because you wouldn't be able to tell me.
Yeah.
Like it's such a weird thing.
Yeah, like particularly me, because I hate everything that you're saying and I have no interest in it. How did I come across this? If you are so silenced, I actively try to avoid you most of the time, and yet here we are. I'm listening to your shitty podcast. It's just a turnkey operation at this point. They've really got it down to like a science of self-publicizing around it, which isn't to say that there aren't elements of toxic culture online. And I think Lindsay Ellis's video on the subject was really good and highlighting like the toxicity of online discourse, both on the left and the right. And it's something that we need to deal with and think about, but it's not something that Barry Weiss is a fucking victim of. Like, she made a career off the back of being mean to her coworkers at the New York Times, and she quit voluntarily to pursue a multi-million-dollar media career. It's so obnoxious at this point.
Yeah. She was, strangely and interestingly enough, primarily mean to other women who worked at the New York Times, according to rumors and other podcasters. She wasn't going after the men or it was other women and sometimes people of color that she was going after when she was like rude to her coworkers and was tweeting, basically quote tweeting someone without quote tweeting them when you know exactly who she was talking about. And I'm just never going to forgive her for those pictures in front of the fucking plants. I'm just telling you. The pictures in front of the plants, and I don't care, like Sam Harris claims he left the IDW, but he went and took the picture in front of the plant, okay?
Yeah, the dark and moody swamp that I actually firmly believe is just where she records from now. Like there's just a desk out there in the middle of that like field, and she's just surrounded by citronella candles.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she created the intellectual dark web, right? I think these people were already interviewing each other, and this thing kind of would have come up without her. But she didn't have to put them in front of a plant. But it was, I don't know. I mean,
it's not real if you don't take yearbook photos, man.
Think about like, there's a little kind of clique of us on Twitter. We all kind of reply to each other and bounce ideas off each other and stuff. And if somebody said, "Listen, I have this idea. Okay, I'm with the New York Times. What I need, it's going to be like the X-Files, but less fog and more shrubbery. And I'm going to take pictures of you." And I'm going to call you renegade thinkers, even though you all think the same thing more or less as each other, and you're all fairly mainstream in what you believe. And we're going to talk about how you've been canceled and how people are coming after you as I write about you in the New York Times. Are you up for it or not? You know?
No. And actually, this is the only time that I will ever defend Joe Rogan.
He
To
didn't
his
stand in front of the
credit,
plant.
he did not stand in front of the plant, and he talked endless shit about the name. uh, I think he referred to it as the intellectual dork web. Um, so that is the one good thing I'll say about our friend Joe Rogan, who is retweeting memes about how moratoriums on evictions during COVID is authoritarianism, and getting those memes from a guy like Lindsay, who parrots white nationalist talking points on his platform. The only
Rogan didn't need to stand in front of the plant. That was why he didn't do it, right? If he was
Yeah.
less famous, less moneyed, he might have done it for the exposure. But at that time, there was no upside for him to stand in front of the plant.
Yeah, I mean, he was the medium, basically. Like Rogan was the plant, right?
Yeah, he was the one he had all of them on, and he
Hmm.
was the bigger platform than all of theirs. Him and basically going into the intellectual dark web, him, Harris, and Peterson were the ones who had like a platform, a fairly big like audience going in, right? The others, the
Hmm.
hangers on, like Brett and Eric, they came out of nowhere kind of because of the other three. They would
Hmm.
never be, and then Barry Weiss, but Barry Weiss came in after Rogan, and to some extent Harris and Peterson had lifted these people up. And
Yeah.
I like for the longest time I was listening to Brett and Eric both on their show and on other people's shows keep saying, no, the intellectual dark web isn't going away, it's not dead, it's not dead. And the reason they were doing that, because they both knew that if that whole thing kind of fell apart and those people stopped interviewing each other all the time, that they were like not very long for this world as public figures with big audiences.
Well, I mean, that was so when the grievance study affair first happened, there was this weird little documentary that came out, where Brett and Heather invited Lindsay and Borgeson, is that how you say his name? Borgosen?
Bogosian,
Borgosian.
Peter
They
Bogosian,
invite
yeah.
Yeah, they invited him, Lindsay, and, Pluckrose, or it's not Pluckrose, it's
Yeah, it's
I get
Helen
him
Pluckrose.
Helen Pluckrose. They invited all three of them to their home, and they did this documentary about how, Brett and Heather are these like survivors of Evergreen, and they're telling these brave intellectuals how they're going to, weather the storm and be bearers of the torch of truth, et cetera, et cetera. And, if you watch it just as like a passive viewer, it is just horrible and boring and not worth paying attention to. But if you watch it as like as an analyst of media, it's very clear that that is a piece of advertising for all of their careers, because Brett and Heather were at the time very much on the cusp of notoriety, but they hadn't made it yet. And they actually specifically say, and this is why I remember this, in the video, they are telling Borgosen and Lindsay that if it weren't for Sam Harris, we would be financially insolvent right now. He is the one who gave us a platform. Um, and effectively, like when you actually look at it in hindsight, it is people who got elevated to notoriety for being weird, cryptic, like pseudo intellectuals, telling other people how to do the same thing and creating this ecosystem for themselves. And it's very instructive to watch it in that light.
Huh, I think it's come across like because we have a YouTube channel that we use like when we're streaming, we
Mhm.
all share it so that our personal YouTube feeds where we might want to watch videos about cars or fishing or things that people are interested in, so that our YouTube channel like feeds don't get polluted with all this IDW crap. Because you watch one Jordan Peterson video and then
Right.
fucking YouTube is just going to feed Brett and Heather and Eric and Joe Rogan and Sam Harris to you until the end of time. And I think I've seen that come up a couple times. And I just saw who was on it, and I was like, we're not even watching this on stream to make fun of it. I'm like, we're not doing this. But now that you mention it, maybe I'll watch it alone, not subject my
Yeah.
chat to it, and kind of
It
try to see what you're saying about it, how they're kind of giving instructions. And
it's
what
it's
you
a very good piece of like it it basically shows how these people like were actively creating a media ecosystem for themselves to be famous within and documenting that for, I guess, as an advertising effort for the thing they were making. It's very meta and it's very weird, but it's absolutely, like, I think essential to understanding what the IDW eventually became.
You know, what you had said there about how they claim that they would have been financially insolvent, I'm just gonna tell you that's bullshit. Brett's brother,
Really?
Eric,
Yeah.
is the managing director at one of the world's biggest venture firms. A middle-class life for them is a rounding error for him in
Yeah.
his
I
personal
mean,
finances. So, I and I don't know if you have I don't know if you have siblings, but if I had 50, he's right now currently worth $57 million.
mm,
If I was worth a tenth of that and I found out my sister was in danger of possibly losing her home or just wasn't financially solvent, I'd just give her a fucking allowance. I'd be like, here's
yeah,
$8,000 a month. I want you to be happy and I have the means to do this. You don't owe me anything for this. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And
but
that would be
you're
that would
not
be,
somebody who works for Peter Thiel.
yeah, but also like Brett and Heather are part of Eric's grift or his, but it's not
Yeah.
even Eric's not grifting. Eric has so much goddamn money. He's doing it. It's like an ego grift, right? It's not like a money grift. Eric wants
Yeah.
people to take him seriously. That's what
Yeah.
he wants. He wants to be taken seriously as a physicist. My take is that Eric is a venture capitalist. He may have a degree in physics, but he's a venture capitalist. The same way that I
Mhm.
am a systems admin and I buy and sell network equipment and to some extent I make some money doing content. My career is not my degree. My career is my career and that's what I do. And so what he wants so badly is to be taken seriously and I think that Brett and Heather are such an integral part of him trying to do that right now that he wouldn't let them fall on their face because
Yeah.
they're more popular than he is right now. They're able to do that kind of grievance shit better than he can right now. And
Yeah.
he's hanging on to them kind of in that way. And like I said, when you're worth $57 million, a middle class life for someone else is a rounding error.
Nah, that's true. And yeah, so I mean, even in that moment, they may have been performing, for all I know. I mean, they were obviously performing for the camera. It was a documentary. They invited those people there to film that conversation. Um, but yeah, I think for them, it's very obviously about money. But I think you're correct about Eric. His goal is to be taken seriously as an intellectual, and
He's ridiculous.
yeah,
I mean, it is a ridiculous notion that someone unified physics by themselves in their spare time. It is a
n-
ridiculous notion. There is no there's no reason anyone should believe that that happened. This idea of like the lone scientist or the lone inventor, like like you know, uh, working away in solitude in their basement or whatever. It's like it was probably never true.
mhm,
Einstein didn't discover all this stuff by himself. Einstein had a team. Everybody had a team. And like if any new, things come along and kind of turn things about physics on their head, it's going to be a team of people. It's not going to be one guy who works for Peter Thiel. Like that's just
yeah,
it's absurd, but they all think that. Uh Eric claims that his wife had a thing about economics that should have like upended all of economics and wasn't paid attention. Brett claimed that he knew something about evolutionary biology that he should have that should have like
telomeres in
yeah,
the
yeah.
pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, that he should have upended, you know, um all of biology and you know, it's pretty unlikely that like two brothers and and their wives would just upend all these parts like established sciences by themselves. It just doesn't seem likely at all. It seems more like delusions of grandeur.
Mhm. Well, for me, so what always convinced me that these people were full of shit is there are so the way academia works, right, is that at every step in the process of becoming an academic, you are under intense pressure to stop pursuing that career because there's always more undergraduates than there are spots in graduate programs. There's always more. PhD researchers than there are postdoc fellowships. There's always more postdocs than there are associate professor spots, et cetera, et cetera. Like everything is on you to it. Like it's either up or out in academia, and there are very few spots on the up track. And being a co-author or somebody who is signing off on a revolutionary theory that will completely change the way your field is thought about would instantly make you a candidate for tenure at a world-class university. And considering the number of people who are in a position to make that gamble, I feel like at least one graduate student somewhere would have read Eric's paper and been like, I'll take that shot. I'll roll those fucking dice. Not a single fucking one.
Well, no, I mean, and Brett and Heather were professors or whatever, and by all accounts, they were popular with the students until they
Yeah.
weren't. And it's you know these people didn't like come up with any revolutionary ideas. Like it's conspiracy thinking again, right?
Yeah.
I have the secret, and the powers that be aren't letting you know about my secret. It's the same thing. It comes back to like right back at the beginning of this conversation, talking about why conspiracy theory is alluring to people. This is the IDW is the same thing as a conspiracy movement. It just is. You have these. You understand. We're reasonable. We're talking to
Mhm.
each other. Your friends don't get it. It's the same thing as chemtrails. Your friends don't get it. We know what's coming out of the back of the plane. It's different subject matters. And to be fair, the people in this intellectual dark web are like more accomplished than your average chemtrails celebrity or whatever. But it's still the same thing. It's the same idea. It's telling people that they have special knowledge, that they're smarter than their friends, and you're part of this movement that wants to get to the truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable. And it's just the same thing. And
Yeah,
I,
it's the
oh, go ahead.
it's the elevation and the synthesis of conspiratorial thinking applied to pseudo-intellectualism.
Right. And this is why, maybe we can kind of wrap it up here. This is why I tell
Yeah.
people that instead of endeavoring to be knowledgeable about a whole bunch of different fields, which is difficult because people generally maybe get expertise in two things, right, in their lifetimes. Maybe extraordinary people might do three. But it's more important, I think, for me, for you, for anybody watching this, to know what the fuck a conspiracy theory looks like, to know how it operates mechanically, to know how it looks when someone's trying to take advantage of their audience. Because
Yeah.
if you can spot that, you don't have to be an expert in anything to know when someone's taking their audience for a ride. You might get false positives sometimes, and there might be people with extraordinary ideas who are right, you initially spot out as conspiracy theorists, right? This may happen, but your hit miss ratio, if you learn the mechanics of this stuff, is going to be pretty good. And the hit
Yeah.
miss ratio of conspiracy theories is pretty bad. And so, when we did a good job of avoiding this, but when Brett Weinstein goes on there and starts telling you about ivermectin and what he's doing and how he's doing it looks like a conspiracy theory to you, you don't need to know shit about ivermectin. You can say that's probably not true. This is probably bullshit. And you'll probably be right. Because
Yeah. I
you
think
and I don't have time to research ivermectin.
yeah. One of the videos of yours that I was watching before this interview, I think you said something to the effect of if you take out all of the nouns and verbs in the ivermectin line, you can just mad libs back into it the chemtrail stuff, and it fits precisely. It's the same pattern.
Yeah, that's why, it's unfortunate. I wrote an article during it's called "The Whole World Has Gone Red Light." Red light is like after our shows, and we used to just have one show. It was on Sunday, and we would do like straight news, well, with an eye to the absurd and crazy, but like straight
Mhm.
news. And then red light, we'd go into conspiracy stuff. And we noticed over time that the kinds of stories we were covering in the post game of the show started to work their way into the regular news. and the stuff in the post game of the show got crazier and crazier and more niche. And so I, decided, well, I guess the whole world's gone red light. And, I
Yeah.
wrote an article about it, and things are, I look back at the article and I'm like, we weren't even fucking halfway down the fucking hill when I figured this out. Like, things are way crazier now. Like, and, it's just, I didn't intend to be right about this stuff. I didn't intend for me covering these wackadoodles, this small group of wackos who believe in chemtrails, and like even having them like yell at me on the phone when they call my show a couple times. I didn't expect that to be useful in helping people discern what's going on in the regular news, but here we are, and it's like really unfortunate. And I think that, like you were saying at the beginning, it's hit the mainstream, and I think that more than ever, people need to have their eye out for this stuff. And to the extent that I'm not mostly just entertaining, to the extent that I can, I do try to help people understand what's going on with the conspiracy movements, how they operate, and like what the red flags are. And yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that hope that over time I get better at it, because we would all like to get better at anything, really. So I guess thanks for your time, man. We went a
Yeah.
little longer
Thank
than I
you.
expected, but this was a lot of fun. And
Yeah. Same.
anytime you want to come on a stream with me, just let me know.
Yeah. This next month is super busy for me. I'm taking a couple classes to try and not be a paramedic anymore, because Delta variant. um, but yeah, I'll get up with you towards the beginning of September. But before we or the middle of September, but before we roll out of here, do you have um anything that you want to plug, like your channel? You got a Patreon? You want anything you want people to know about you on my end of things?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll send you a list of links and stuff too. But check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Echoplex Media, and my website, echoplexmedia.com. You can find everything. All of our stuff is on our website. So anything you'd want to find. Oh, and if you go echoplexmedia.com/shots, you can take a look at all the dumb screenshots we've taken of the things we've watched during our streams for like the last year. They're in no particular order. None of them have any description, and a lot of them are really funny, especially the ones from like the Maury Show from the 80s. People with weird sunglasses and shit. But yeah, we have a lot of fun on the Twitch channel. It's this, you might listen to this and think that there's a lot of doom and gloom, but we do have a lot of fun. We have a great community there. If you never use Twitch, that's a pretty good place for you to land, because everybody there is real nice, and nobody will act like you're stupid
Yeah,
because you don't know how things work there.
yeah. I stream Stardew Valley on Twitch exclusively to vibe and unwind after work.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, it's a good stream. I've seen the highlights of it on YouTube. I've never actually been present during one of your live shows, but yeah, everybody should go check that out. And I thank you for coming on the show, man. It was a really good time. Dave from Echoplex Media. Thank you.
Thanks again.